Hey, good morning. Excuse the voice here. My allergies are kicking in, but good morning to all of you out there in Facebook land. This is Brother Dana again, coming to you live from Chicago. I just wanted to do another video, following up even on yesterday morning's video. It just amazes me how everybody's trying to find this motive of this white man that shot all these individuals in Las Vegas. And I'm just thinking to myself, it's such a double standard. Because why is it that every time one of my black brothers gets shot, they don't look at the motive behind the police officer? They're not looking behind the motive of our criminal injustice system. But they always say, I need to know the whole story first. Well, let me say then what I believe is the whole story here. White America is reaping what you sow. So what is the motive? The motive behind the shooter that shot these innocent white people in Las Vegas is the same motive that shoots innocent black men in our United States, which is the same motive that puts our black men in correctional facilities, treating them like they are guilty before they have trial, even though it says that one is innocent until proven guilty. The same motive. The difference is the motive is now being turned upon ourselves. So we're going out here trying to find the motive of this white man and how this singular white man could do what he did to all these innocent white people. What was his motive? I sure wish white America would have done that over all these years, to ask each and every single person that shot and has killed our innocent black men and women, what was your motive? But instead, they always turn it around and say, I need to know the whole story first. So again, I'm telling you the whole story. It's the same motive. It's evilness. And the difference is, though, that we are going to begin to reap the harvest of our own evilness within our own people. See, white America wants to always look at our black brothers and sisters as if they are from the root evil. And that's what we believe. See, we believe that you as blacks are born evil. You're born wild. And it is us whites that have brought you into civilization. We're the ones that have made you become civil. But us white people are born decent, good, loving, kind individuals. So that when you see a young black man running, the chances of that black man being one who is good is 1 out of 10. Versus the chance of a white man being bad is only 1 out of 10. That's why we shoot you, because the chances are you're bad. Because you are not the one of the, 1% that has changed. That's why you always hear white people say, well, this black person isn't like the rest of them. What? So anyway, I wanted to share with you this morning, how that angers me. And I get some text messages and I've gotten some emails about how my fellow white brothers and sisters feel like I'm shaming the white race. And my response to that is you should feel shame. You should feel shame that our black brothers and sisters are putting in these jails, not yet gone to trial, but treated like an animal, or even worse than. You should feel shame that every time a black individual is shot, you don't look at the motive of the shooter, but you sit back and say, well, I'm not going to say anything till I get the whole story, because the black individual probably did something that deserved it. It's a double standard. So the motive is the same thing that, and we want to say that this is the largest massacre in the United States thus far. No, It's the largest massacre of people that this country values. But it is not the largest massacre. The largest massacre first started when we murdered millions of Native American Indians. But that's right, they're not valued. Then the next massacre has been when we have raped and murdered millions and millions of Africans who now are our black brothers and sisters in this country. But wait, you're right, they're not valued. And then let's look at even Black Wall Street down near Tulsa, Oklahoma, where whites were jealous of the prosperity of our fellow black brothers and sisters. And so within a day or so, they massacred and killed hundreds, if not thousands, of innocent blacks who were living their lives in Black Wall Street. But that's right, that's a massacre of animals, which is not equal to the massacre of white people. But this is my challenge. And yes, I know, some people say I'm angry. I am angry. I'm very angry. I'm very angry. What I'm trying to do is call out to my Father, Yah.
I'm sorry, what?
Now, when we get into this, how far are we coming? Here we have Yah. When people say, okay, forget this Christian stuff, I think I understand. It's just a tool. It's a weapon of war, and we've been overthrown. I want to call on the Creator. What's the Creator's name? So you have people that say Yahweh. Okay, so here we have etymology. Okay, so at etymology.com, we see here, Yah is an exclamation of defiance or dismissal. So listen to me very carefully. All the fuck shit, moron, dick, whatever. All this shit aside. If you have beliefs, you should be able to study and back up your beliefs. Set your emotion aside. Set what people told you aside. And think about the things that you've actually read yourself. Because what I have on the screen, it is words. And we can sit here and we can read those words together. I didn't make this definition. I read this definition and it enlightened me. So if it does not enlighten you, then the actual definition of words don't mean shit to you. So when you say, I don't believe you understand what the words I don't believe you actually mean. Because if you can't believe the definition of this, then how can I believe you can understand the definition of other things? See what I'm saying? Again, some famous statement that some wise person said, your ignorance is not my fault. Yah, exclamation of defiance. I defy you. Right? Mom and dad told you to go and do this, and you said, no, I'm not going to do that. All right? Let's see. Exclamation. Say it to me.
Exclamation.
Look at all this. This is a hard word for children. Children have a hard time saying CKSX.
Exclamation. Exclamation.
To cry, to call, to shout, to yell. Let's go back. Now we know what the word exclamation means. To cry, to shout, to yell, a cry, a shout, a yell of defiance. How can you be calling out to a god if you're actually saying their name and it's actually defiance? Do you understand what the word defiance means? Because, if you don't, that would make sense why you don't believe. I spelled it wrong. Of course you did. You're just dumb. I said ents instead of ents. To open resistance. Open resistance. To openly resist. Bold disobedience. Wait. You're supposed to be obedient to the Creator, but this name Yahweh means a cry out, to yell out disobedience. So a lot of you have been here for a while, so you understand I've taught this lesson before. And a lot of people don't want to accept it. When Judgment Day is not going to say anything to me or about me to you. He's not going to say anything to you about me. He's going to say, you knew what wasn't my name, and you knew what was my name. Someone taught you. You were taught.
Defiance.
Right?
Exclamation.
To cry out in such a way of open resistance. That's what you call on. Yahweh. Look up here. Don't look down here yet. You're cheating. Look up here first. Know what it's connected to. Way. Yahweh. Yiddish exclamation. Whoa. Wait. I just saw another definition and the first thing it said is exclamation. That's interesting. That's interesting. Look at this. Yah. Exclamation of defiance. Way. Exclamation of dismay. Look at that. What is dismay? Well, let's go over here. We just found out what defiance is and all that shit, right? Auto chop down. I'm saying it wrong again. Here, let's get rid of that one. And we understand the price of the book or the map. Still 20. Whatever it is that has to do with the book, it was $22,000. All right. Exclamation. Let's see. Dismay. Consternation and distress, typically that caused by something unexpected. Synonyms: alarm, shock, surprise. Now look, this one word, Yahweh, is starting to build its own sentence, isn't it? To shout, right? To shout in defiance, right? To shout out against dismay, right?
Dismay.
Distress. To shout out against in distress. You're supposed to call the... Look at that shit! Look at what these wicked motherfuckers have done! They taught us Yahweh is the name of the Creator, so that you what? You shout out. Right? Oh, I can't believe this shit. I cannot believe this shit. To shout out, exclamation of defiance, to go against. Right? Or dismissal, you know what it means to dismiss, right? You're the bride. If you dismiss, you just broke up, right? You and your girlfriend had a shouting breakup, right? Exclamation of dismay, distress. Now, when you're in distress, you're supposed to call on the Lord in your calamity.
To ask him that my motives would be righteous, just like Yeshua, or as others call Jesus, flipped over the tables when he saw the injustice of the religious people taking advantage of those who traveled to Jerusalem. So yes, I am angry. I'm very angry, but anger is powerful when it's channeled in the right direction. And then my white people want to say that you are making us feel shame. You should feel shame. But see, I don't feel shame anymore, because I've acknowledged, accepted, and repented of what we have done to our black brothers and sisters. So now instead of feeling shame, I feel that anger. I feel that anger when I have white men who refuse to walk the streets in our black communities, but yet will run to the prison system to bring the hope of the gospel. Well, why don't you bring this hope to the incorrectness and the injustices of our system? But see, you're just like those Christians in our early days that brought the gospel to the slaves that were chained up, but yet refused to speak out on their behalf due to the injustices. And white people, you don't understand, racism isn't just because you call a black person an N-word, or because you say, oh, I wouldn't want to see a black person lynched. That just because you feel that way doesn't mean you're not racist. How do you know if you're racist? As I shared before, nobody knows if they're racist or the extent of your racism until you put yourself in a situation where you're faced with what's in your heart. And if you've never lived in a black community, if you've never lived amongst blacks, and I put it this way, you refuse to look into a black mirror to find out how much white racism and supremacy lies in you. Because every time our blacks cry out for justice, you're the first one to ignore them. So are you racist? Yes, you are. Are you feeling shame right now because of how I speak? Then yes, you have racial issues inside your heart. Because when you repent and when you acknowledge, then it is only the enemy that tries to make you feel shame. So if you're feeling shame, it's probably because you haven't repented of what you know to be true. And that this country does not allow our black brothers and sisters to be free, and they are not valued as equal human beings. So, what is the motive? It's the same motive that kills our innocent black men. Oh, but Brother Dana, you know, the cops don't go after innocent people, so there must be a reason why the cops go after these black individuals, so they can't be that innocent. That's why I want to know the rest of the story. Well, again, let me tell you the rest of the story. Do you think we white people are innocent? Do you think us white people are innocent of evil? We are the kings of evilness. Look at our history. Look at our history, okay? And then now look at our present. But again, you don't want to accept the present. You don't want to answer the question to why our men at Cook County Jail here, who are waiting trial, are treated worse than a bunch of animals. I even read today some of the amendments, and it said that individuals in this nation should not be humiliated or excessive force put upon them or torture while they're in the hands of the justice system. Wow, do you know that Michael Sanders is a young man, not a young man, he's my age. I've been walking with him for 19 years, who was falsely accused of raping and murdering 2 white women. After how many years, he was found guilty and sentenced to life plus 65 years. Now, he's never been in trouble all these years in prison. But then a few weeks ago, I got a letter from him, and they put him down in isolation, down in a hole. And I found out why. Because he had great favor, he would be walking around doing hospice and other things because of the man of Yah, who he is. Well, all of a sudden, a cell phone was found in the prison system where Michael Sanders is in Joliet, Illinois. And because of the freedom of the movement that he has, he was questioned, and they brought him in because they figured he knew something about this cell phone. Well, when he said, I know nothing about it, you know what they did? They took his glasses off his face, and I have now refused to give them back to him and said, until you confess, we're taking your glasses. That's humane. Should we feel shame about that, white America? Absolutely. And then they put him down in the hole. No evidence based that he had anything to do with it. But there was no evidence that he raped and murdered 2 women either. Now he's spending the rest of his life in prison. So what is the motive behind this shooter? It's the same motive that has cut down our Native American Indians. It's the same motive that doesn't go to Puerto Rico because they're worthless people. It's the same motive that looks upon those that were in New Orleans and the help was refused to come their way. It's the same motive that shoots and kills our black men and women, and we want to know the whole story. It's the same motive that this country has done to destroy and to hold down our black brothers and sisters. But see, the difference is, and the only difference is here, is that the other end of this motive is our own people. People perish for a lack of knowledge and wisdom. Well, guess what? The knowledge and wisdom that us white folk need to embrace is that we are a bunch of evil people. And we have a history of being evil. And that is the truth. And when you know that truth, it'll set you free according to the words of Jesus. So embrace this truth, white America. We're evil. We've done evil things. And now your God is going to allow that same evilness to come upon us, because what you reap, what you sow is what you reap. If you live by that sword, now you're going to die by that sword. So thank you for tuning in. Please hit me up, One Love Society. And I want to say this to you as my black brothers and sisters. One thing you'll see us white people do, we band together. We band together when stuff happens like this. Look at the thousands of people that were there in line to give blood. But see, you have believed the lies that we have placed in your mind, that you have accepted the truth, that your brothers that are out on these streets doing what they're doing are doing it because they're no good, they're lazy, they're invaluable. But you have to change that mindset. We've made you believe that. They're not worthless. David went to the cave, and in there he found the men that became the greatest army ever to be, and they were lawbreakers. And I'm not saying that all our men out on these streets are lawbreakers. They have a record. But because they have a record doesn't mean they're a lawbreaker. It just means they live in a society that gives them a record to give them an image or a value of a lawbreaker. But why do we consider them lawbreakers when we know that our justice system is far from being just to you, my black family? So we have to change our mindset. And we have to come together. Those guys out on the street need to be seen as business owners. Right now, they're just being a business owner in a society that calls it wrong. But once that weed and once those drugs are legal, then my white people become millionaires on it, while my black brothers out on the street are still being put in jail and prison for it. We need to come together, and that is what the movement that I want to start is all about, called the One Love Movement. Bringing in the resources of you, the chosen people of Yah. Because I'm telling you, the tables are turning. If white America believes we serve a just God, then when does justice begin to come on the actions of what we've done? And most of the white people that tell me that I'm wrong, had a classmate from Moody tell me I'm on some crazy ideology. And so I asked them, where does Deuteronomy 28 come from? Where does it, who is it talking about? And what ideology am I crazy about? Because see, that's another thing I want to ask you as my black brothers and sisters to start doing. Stop defending yourself. When white America wants to tell you that racism is no longer around, I want you to ask them, prove it. How do white people determine whether or not racism is still around? I know why, because everything white folks say is the truth.
What you talking about, mister?
So be encouraged to know, wherever you are in your journey, whether you recognize who you are as Yah's chosen people, or if you're still seeking out and you're a follower of Jesus Christ, right now we all need patience in our journey. But one thing I know is true. Your freedom of this slavery and this oppression that you have lived under for over almost 400 years is coming to an end. Your ancestors were first brought as slaves in Jamestown in 1619, maybe 1620.
Hold up, wait a minute.
So, with no further ado, let's commence. First slide says sold. Benzoni was a conquistador in the 16th century. Benzoni tells us in his day, circa 1550s, that American captives were being traded for wine, flour, biscuits, and other merchandise, even including women made pregnant by their captors. Source: American Discovery by Jack Forbes, page 170.
Add 400 years to that, my black brothers and sisters. You get to 2019, 2020. Your ancestors were in slavery under the Egyptians for 400 years. I'm not going to be this prophet that says immediately when the 400 years comes, it's over. I'm not going to do that. Because I'm not going to be a lying prophet like Pat Robertson right now, who says that, which doesn't make sense. The shooting in Las Vegas is a result of us disobeying or coming against President Trump. Well, I could understand if that's true, if it was black individuals at a rap concert. But yet he shot down the very people that put him in office. That makes a lot of sense, Pat Robertson. But hey, you're old and you're crazy and you're as much of a racist at the core of your heart than the rest of my white family in this country that has not acknowledged the truth of what we have done and are doing. See, what white folk don't understand because of a lack of wisdom. See, people perish for a lack of wisdom. You, as my black brothers and sisters, may perish because you lack the wisdom of who you are. But see, my white people are going to perish because we also lack the wisdom of who you are. And us white people are going to perish because we lack the wisdom to know that it was you, my black brothers and sisters, that created this nation. Ask a white person about the inventions that they use on a daily basis that were invented by a black brother and sister, and most of them will have no clue. So they'd have to put their cell phone away. They'd have to stop using the internet. I mean, I can go on and on and on. So let us band together. Unity is what my people have done to keep you from being powerful and from rising up. You have to unify. I cannot, again, I can teach a man how to be a man, but I cannot teach a black man how to be a black man. You can do that. I've not been in your shoes. I cannot tell you what to do or how to do it. I can only tell you that you need to do it. And I can only tell you the things that we, my white brothers and sisters and my white family has done to tear down. Read the Willie Lynch letters. The number one thing that we did was to break the strong man. And it said that when you want to break a wild horse or a black man, the first thing you need to do is you need to change their mindset so that they're no longer aware of their natural state. Because in your natural state, you recognize who you are. And you're powerful. And you have the ability to resist anything that comes against who you are in the natural state. Well, we've taught you that in your natural state, you're a lunatic. You're a wild beast and an animal like that of a wild horse. But the reality is, in your natural state, you're kings and queens. So may Yah bless you. May God bless you. And may you know that your redemption is near. Your God has not forgotten you. Your God has not forgotten you. Coming from somebody on the other side, your God has not forgotten you. I see it. He's coming back to redeem you. Be encouraged.
Wake up! There it is, old African. My surrender land. Them his niggas. This is home.
Say, Fiddler, what you bring us?
Hold on now. I'll be right there. Let me get down. Now, I done stole a whole sugar loaf from the white folks' table at night. Just now you equals up and shares it around. Get some. Now come here, let me show you something. This here is a Guinea man, an African. They catch him running through the woods in Guinea. Master Reynolds brought him right off the ship. Now you keep away from him now, because he a wild African. Oh, yeah, he a bobcat for sure. Now, some of you ain't never seen no African niggas before, so you just listen to old Fiddler now. This here Guinea man don't know English talking, so I'll be the one teaching him what it is he got to know.
1 year ago tonight, Roots, the saga of an American family, literally blazed across this nation's screens. For 8 consecutive nights, more Americans watched this story than have ever watched any other in history. Based on the Pulitzer Prize-winning book by Alex Haley, the 12-hour drama touched the nerve endings and the hearts of over 130 million Americans. It then went on to capture the imagination of peoples all over the world.
I'm Louis Gossett Jr. I was privileged to be part of Roots. I played the role of Fiddler, a black man born into slavery, one who had never known the taste of freedom. I, along with hundreds of others, worked here on this set of the main house of the plantation on which another black man, the African Kunta Kinte, lived and died. I have been part of that drama ever since. For the drama around Roots did not end with the final broadcast of the 12th hour on the 8th night. It continues even now in the dialogue it generates between blacks and whites and among those who are trying to understand the history of their country. It continues to this day to bring families together and to provoke millions of others to seek out their own roots.
Cut him down.
Tonight, we will look back on the impact of those epical 8 nights of January 1977. We will look again at some of the memorable scenes from the television production.
There's gonna be another day. You hear me? There's gonna be another day.
We will see how Roots affected the American people, including another Southerner who, like Alex Haley in the fall of 1976, had just achieved national fame.
Notice that I was a little late arriving. I met Alex Haley outside, and I made the mistake of saying, "Alex, how's your family?" Unfortunately, he told me, and it took a while to get in.
We will accompany Alex Haley on a triumphal and an emotional return to his ancestral village of Jufere on the west coast of Africa, where during a 12-year search, he found his roots. (1750), a remote Mandinka village in the Gambia, West Africa. The firstborn child of Amoru, a son only 8 days old, has just been given his name. Thus begins the drama of the book and the television production of Roots.
Kunta Kinte. Behold, the only thing greater than yourself.
The boy, Kunta Kinte, grew to manhood, knowing freedom and dignity. Then he was captured and taken to America as a slave. Kunta's story was told to the young Alex Haley on the front porch of his childhood home in Henning, Tennessee. It was told to him by his grandmother, Cynthia. She had heard the tales of the African from her father, tales passed down from generation to generation. It was these tales that Alex Haley spent 12 years researching in an obsessive attempt to know all that he could possibly know about his ancestors. About his great-grandfather, Tom Murray, a blacksmith who had been born into slavery and set free after the Civil War. about his great-great-grandfather, the legendary Chicken George. About Kizzy, Chicken George's mother, who had been sold away from her parents. Kizzy had heard the stories of Africa directly from her father, Kunta Kinte. To piece together the jigsaw puzzle of his heritage, Alex Haley traveled over 500,000 miles on 3 continents, coming finally to the remote village of Jufere. 2 Mandinka words passed across 6 generations: Kambi Balongo, meaning river, and Ko, meaning guitar, were the main clues that finally led Alex Haley to this Gambian village. Here, in long sessions, he listened as the oral historian of the village, an elder called a griot, related the past history of the Kinte clan.
Very blessed by God, by Allah. During the course of time, one of the Kinte boys went in to chop wood for his parents.
Alex Haley remembers.
When the old griot's long narrative confirmed what I'd long since heard from my grandmother, I experienced an emotion I had never before felt in my entire life. It was a visceral emotion. It felt as if my very insides were churning around. I could feel goose pimples, because there was no way in the world for him to know what I had been told as a boy. What he had just told me meant that my long search was over. I had found my roots.
I smell bullshit.
The deception, the betrayal. Negro, please.
And also, he's the first dude of substance that blew the whistle on what's the guy who wrote Roots? Alex Haley. And Alex Haley hadn't wrote none of that. You know, I was out there doing it because I don't care what you think of me. I know he didn't write it. The senior editor of Playboy magazine, Murray Fisher, wrote all of that stuff, okay? And if you punch up on your computer, Harry Hollander, who wrote one of the best books on Africa called The African, a white boy. Kunta Kinte came out of his book word for word. Huh?
Oh, wow.
And if you check out the trial in upstate New York, where a federal judge made the publisher and Alex Haley pay him $650,000 and then chastised, made him apologize to him in the court, and the judge said, I worked a lot of these cases, but I never saw anybody take something word for word like you have. And
You know what?
Yep.
I would say, like with Tarantino, he said that he said that Django was better than Roots, and a lot of people got mad about that. He said Django Unchained was better than Roots.
It was. It was.
Okay.
It was better than Roots. Huh? Well, at least we know where it come from. When that Kunta Kinte got that book, he couldn't hit that white boy. So who cares? So when you doing the truth, you know how many people got mad at Jesus? They killed King. Did he make you mad? Huh? Okay, so you gonna pick who you gonna be mad at and who you're not, because you don't understand. I just told you just now. And one of the things I think you should do, if we don't have the time now, listen, you got your computer sitting in front of you.
Yes, sir.
You got it in front of you?
Yes, sir.
Then punch up the federal courts in upstate New York, punch up Harry Hollander, who wrote The African and the case. It is right there. Okay? All that crap he was doing wasn't nothing but lies. Huh? Wasn't nothing but lies. That somebody else wrote the truth, but he didn't write it. Huh? He didn't write it. If I know that Alex Haley didn't write Roots and didn't write Malcolm, okay? See, the thing you asked him, he said he hated Malcolm. Listen, he wasn't just working. They recruited Alex Haley out of naval intelligence, okay?
Right.
Now, how I know that and he don't know it, right? All right? Now, when he became world renowned, it was because the articles, while he's supposed to have been with Malcolm, he was doing for Playboy magazine. Okay? He didn't write none of them articles in Playboy magazine. Okay? That was the editor of Playboy, Murray Fisher. Right? Who wrote that, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, when the book come out, Murray Fisher wrote the book. All of it, right? Now, let's take a look at it. When the brother said that he plagiarized, right? The author. Now listen to this. He Roots, that came out of the book called The African. You know, Harold Portlander, right?
Yes, sir.
When he said he sued him, it wasn't $1 million. He sued him, and they settled out of court for $650,000. And he had to admit, okay, that he took the stuff out of the book, that he had never done none of that stuff he said in the book and the whole thing, right?
Yes, sir.
And so now the trial lasted, I think it was 2 weeks, right? Now, the great part about this here is this trial took place in federal court. All right. So that's public domain. All you gotta do is hit up and you find out the date of the trial took place, the judge's name. During the trial, presiding U.S. District Judge Robert J. Ward stated, copyright, this is, period. In a later interview, he told BBC television, Judge Ward said Alex Haley perpetrated the biggest hoax in the history of the public, right? And now this is documented. This is federal court. He told him, go settle this, or I'm going to get you for perjury, because we have evidence. Told him, some of his lawyers, that you had this book 18 months before you testified that you ever heard of it, okay?
Excuse me.
Hey, it's Kunta Kinte!
100 years later, the Negro is still languishing in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. Now, have you ever wondered what that passage meant from Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech? I did, and what I found was one of the biggest secrets that's not really a secret at all, except to many African Americans, is they are not descended from Africans. I know, I was shocked too, so much so that I asked Africans, and they agreed African Americans weren't Africans. If you don't believe me, Google Arnaldus Montanus America and see the people he saw in 1671. Read books like The Black American Handbook for Survival through the 21st Century by Radine Amin-Ra, What Every African American Should Know by Carrie Davis, and Africans and Native Americans by Jack Forbes. I just can't believe schools aren't teaching this stuff. What a travesty.
tension between African Americans and America as a whole.
Some
African Americans. No. As a whole, the history of African Americans in America, right, does not really work in the favor of African Americans.
Can I ask you a quick question in the midst of that?
Okay.
What do when not all, when you tell an African American, now times have changed. Now we're now getting 2015 now. As African American, are you African? Oh hell, I ain't African.
You're not wrong though. You're not wrong though. You're not wrong though.
They're not wrong. They're not wrong.
They're not wrong. No, are they right?
But it's just the reaction.
Okay. Sure.
Now, and I could be a little sensitive because of how I grew up.
Okay, hold up. Here's
this is
going to answer that question. So, the history of African Americans in America does not necessarily work in their favor based on everything that was logged. As you see all the movies, 12 Years a Slave, it's a constant reminder that, hey, African Americans, this is your story in America. When I was in Nigeria, I did not know of the African American story until I got to America. I know of the African American story until I got to America and found out.
That's true.
Right? I did not know anything about slavery. All I knew was we were all given kings' names. Right? I did not know anything about slavery.
They're always vague with us. I asked this African dude one time. I was like, why don't y'all? Because Africans don't like African Americans. I don't know if you know this. Yeah, they don't. You know you don't. Don't be looking at me like, no, you are okay. They don't like us, yo. They don't like us. They be judging us. They be looking at us like, look at you, motherfucker. African American. My ass. You are not African.
You're black American. Come from Kenya.
You got the same phone. What are you talking about?
From Kenya. You have got the trust about.
You're in America now. What are you talking about? Why you not in Africa? Why you not in Africa?
I have to look down on you because you're African.
You're not making no sense. You're crazy.
You're black American. You're trash.
Listen to this. This is why we're African.
The man in Kenya told me on the phone. The man in Kenya told me on the phone. Don't even associate the black American. Don't even associate the black American.
This is why we're African.
The man in Kenya told me on the phone. Don't even associate the black American. They have no self-esteem. No self-esteem.
And Agonglo was said to be one of the kings who tried to stop slave trade. But of course he did not succeed.
But he must have known how bad it was.
Yes, he knew. They knew how bad it was. That was why they didn't trade their own people. They would trade people from the wars and battles they did all around the country.
Okay, it's a hot day today, and we're about to go over this road, and what they're saying, this is the road of where the slaves went, the road of no return. So, Nini, just tell us some things about where we're about to go.
Okay, we go to the ocean where they put the slaves in the ships, but the slaves came from the interior. They were bought from the chiefs, from the kings in the interior, and the king got in return cannons and weapons.
Wow. And so literally they were walking this way to get on the ship. And can you imagine the things in which they were thinking going through their head, going to the ship, and this is a place of no return.
Pour toute l'Afrique, for all the Africa, il y a 4 ports.
For all in all Africa, they have 4 gates. The population of the slave that went out here through this gate was the most slaves.
When they did not have enough chains, they cut a tree, they made a log out of it, and they cut 3 holes in it.
Came from.
And they put 3 holes, and they put the log on top of their head, so that the 3 stay together, walk together behind each other.
How many people were side by side?
600 walked side by side.
You know, it's like an arrow. It means that this road that you come through, it have only one entry. That is no returning back, is the unknown destination. During that route here, all sorts of things happen with the slaves. They can sleep with them, they can beat them, they can do so many things there. Violence.
On peut dire l'abolition en 1848. Et en 1846, c'est le dernier bateau.
The last ship went on 1846, and it was then they don't got any other ship came in for slavery.
Ici, sur les 4 poteaux, il y a hommes et femmes qui sont en genoux.
In all this, you see men and women, men and women, you know, in the forts.
They put a tattooage, they burn it in the back here. The name of the master.
When they do that, they cry, so they go now and buy some iron to close their mouths.
Close their mouths.
Yeah, that's why their mouth is.
And a lot of the slaves came down to the Contra Costa area. There was a report made by an agent, E.F. Beale, during the late 1850s, I believe it was, in which he talks about the Castros having native labor, which they used only for part of the year and then turned them loose to starve to death after the growing season is over.
And we know for a fact that in 1852, Salvio Pacheco had 20 Indians on his rancho.
During this period of time, the federal government is doing not doing hardly anything to protect California Indians. There were a series of treaties that were negotiated in 1852, but these treaties were not ratified by the United States Senate.
So they were in almost virtual slavery, according to the law, in the early 1850s.
In other words, it's not like Southern slavery where the slaves are kept permanently. It's more of a slavery in which people are rounded up, made to work during the season in which they're needed, but the exploiter does not want to feed them during the off-season, and so they're turned loose to fend for themselves during the off-season, and then they're rounded up again when they're needed at another time.
Shalom, and welcome to another video at the Genesis 49ers page. Today's video is going to be, you guessed it, the slave trade, the Native Indian slave trade. We're going to deal with Native Indian slavery, and we're going to deal with them being sold on ships, because there's a lie, you know, going out, and a rumor going out that, oh, Native Indians were never sold on ships, on cargo slave ships, as slaves. You know, according to Deuteronomy 28:68, that the Israelites would be sold on ships and sold as slaves by the way of ships. So we're going to prove that the Native Indians fit that prophecy as well in today's presentation. So with no further ado, let's commence. First slide says sold. Benzoni, which Benzoni was a conquistador in the 16th century. Benzoni tells us in his day, circa 1550s, that American captives were being traded for wine, flour, biscuits, and other merchandise, even including women made pregnant by their captors. Source: American Discovery by Jack Forbes, page 170. I'm going to be using Jack Forbes sources throughout the whole presentation because Jack Forbes is an expert when it comes to this, and a lot of other media outlets or other sources, they tend to kind of not talk about this or ignore this topic because the Indians were very much so sold as slaves, and a reason why they don't want to talk about it because it makes blacks and Indians relate to each other. Also, they want to push that lie that all Native Indians are distinct. There's no Native Indians, which the Mosquito Men debunked that. And you can look up the Mosquito Men. Those are those Indian tribes that fled to the mountains of Guatemala and Central America and basically exclude themselves from anything the Spaniards or Portuguese, Dutch, or English were doing for hundreds and hundreds of years and preserve themselves. And a lot of them are black. Those are Native Indians that never mixed racially with the conquistadors. And you can look those people up. They're called the Mosquito or the Mosquito Indians. Not to be confused with the Spanish word mosquito, which means fly. Alright? So let's go to the next slide. So what do we find out about this on this slide? That they were American, meaning Native Indian captives, were being traded for wine, flour, biscuits, and other merchandise, even including women pregnant by their captors. Okay, so they were being sold. It says during the 16th and 17th century, Spain was home to 100,000 to 300,000 captives. A lot of these slaves were Native Indian as well. Okay. Why? Because we know Seville or Sevilla, Spain, was a known slave port, and a lot of Native Indians were sold to this slave port as well. Continuing on. Lisbon. Lisbon is in Portugal, and they have a rich history of having Indian slaves as well. As late as circa 1710, the Portuguese of the Piauí region were trading away 3 or 4 Americans for 1 African from Mongolia. A source: American Discovery by Jack Forbes, page 172. Lisbon again. Many Americans ended up in Lisbon, the Algarve, and other sections of Portugal. In 1591, a confraria organization existed for Indians living in Lisbon. So that proves, how did they get to Lisbon? How did they get to Portugal? Did they fly over there? Did they go on Expedia.com and book a plane and a hotel? No, we know they were brought over in cargo slave ships. And to the right, you can see a depiction of the yokes of iron on the Brazilian Indians, or the Amazonian Indians of that time. And the source again, American Discovery by Jack Forbes, page 172. All right, the topic is war here. It says the establishment of British colonies in North America and the Caribbean greatly accelerated the adoption of slavery by the English. Many thousands of Americans were either captured in warfare or purchased by allied tribes and sold to various regions, including Barbados. Listen now, I want you guys to really pay attention to what I'm about to read and reveal to you. Including Barbados, I mean they were sold, they had to go to Barbados because this took place in New England, okay, the 13 colonies. They were sold from that area down into Barbados, which is islands within the Circum-Caribbean, right? Jamaica, also within the Circum-Caribbean, okay? Providence Island, Circum-Caribbean. Spain, what we talked about earlier, Sevilla, Spain, or Seville, Spain. And North Africa. They were also sold into North Africa, the Mediterranean area, okay? So, let that be noted, okay, and understood that they, shout out to my brother who brings it out like that, Moshe. But anyway, at any rate, let that be duly noted and understood that they were sold into North Africa, they were sold into Spain, they were sold into to Barbados, Jamaica. They were sold all over, okay, just like the scriptures say what happened to the native Indian stock or the Israelite stock, okay, because Indian is a exonym. It's not an endonym. An exonym is something that, a title that was, or appellate placed on them by outside race or force, which Indian just means servant. It comes from the Latin indios. All right, let's deal with these ships. It says, New England saw a large number of Pequots, Narragansetts, excuse me if I butcher that, and others sold in 1638, and in the period from 1676 to 1683, many went to Tangiers. Tangiers is in Africa. Tangiers is in Africa, North Africa, Morocco. Tangiers, Morocco. After 1670, South Carolina became a major exporter of slaves. They were selling the native Indians as slaves. They were exporting them, taking them away from America and selling them on ships, depopulating Florida in the process. One of those places they took them to Tangiers, Morocco. Okay, they were sold and put into bondage by ships across seas. And the source, American Discovery by Jack Forbes, page 175. And to the right, you can see an image that clearly depicts this. It's Comstock clipper line for San Francisco, composed of strictly first-class clipper ships with quick dispatch. The well-known and favorite clipper ship King Philip. They named the ship after King Philip, which is Metacomet, right? Matacomet, the Indian king at that time of the Pequots. They named the ship after him to mock the fact that they took the Pequots and other various Indian tribes and sold them on ships. They named the ship after him, King Philip. Next slide. Indios, which you covered, means servants, slaves. After Pequot English War in New England, many American prisoners were enslaved and sold. In 1638, many slaves were sold to the West Indies. Indians believed to be hostile were shipped away to slave markets of the West Indies, Spain, and the Mediterranean coast, which included North Africa. Source, Africans and Native Americans by Jack Forbes, page 55. Moving on. Ships again. John Eliot, which he wrote a history of the New World. Basically, he's one of the early authors of writing histories of the New World, and this is what he understood. It says, knew of a case in which a vessel filled with Indian prisoners. What vessel? A ship. Is this talking about a 747? A jet? No, this is talking about a ship. Did they go to American Airlines? Okay, no. They were made captives, put on ships, just like the scriptures depicted us, and depicted that we would go through. Okay? Let me read it again. John Eliot knew of a case in which a vessel filled with Indian prisoners tried in vain to unload its human cargo. She finally managed to get rid of them at Tangiers in North Africa, where they were still living in 1683. Okay? Source, Africans and Native Americans by Jack Forbes, page 55. To the right, you see the image, and you see Native Indians. What color are they? They are depicted as being brown, dark-skinned, black-skinned beings. Okay? And I put this in here to bring everything home. Alright? Because the Native Indians were originally Negroids. It says, note that the Native New England people are blacks, not what they call Native American Indians. Okay? Alright? So let that be understood. Next slide. Ships again. A policy was developed early in New England of exchanging Americans overseas for Africans. After the 1637-38, that policy was effectively implemented by means of war, which provides captives. Source, Africans and Native Americans by Jack Forbes, page 56. What war? The King Philip War. The war against the Pequot and the English. Alright? To the right, you can see an advertisement for tobacco. And what color are these Indians again? They're black. And you can see to the back. Notice there's a Negro Indian in the back. And he's holding up some sort of leaf or umbrella to shade the white man that's doing business or purchasing or retrieving his product from these slaves, these servants. Okay? This is an actual advertisement by Rose of West Virginia, White Valley, Chancery Lane, London. Look at that. the truth right in your face. And these Native Americans were sold as slaves. In closing, I want to just make a quick PSA, if you will. You know, a lot of videos come out on YouTube. A lot of videos try to come against the Native Indians, being the Northern Kingdom of Israel. Okay, a lot of people try to go against the 12 tribes chart. But one thing they fail at doing is providing source material or anything that can debunk the claims. Okay, I can clearly show, as what was seen in this video, that they fit the prophecy in Deuteronomy 28 verse 68 when it says that we'll be sold as slaves on ships. They fit that prophecy. There's no denying that. They were black. They're still black to this day. Just you don't recognize that they are original or aboriginals of this land. That's all it is. You're just confused. Like I said, reference the mosquito ban. They are all Negroid Indians who never amalgamated or mixed with quote-unquote Europeans. Because guess what? Caucasians are not Europeans either. They don't even belong there. Okay? But that's another class, another topic we'll touch in a future lesson, be it the Lord will. Be it Lord's will. With that, I'm going to say shalom. As you can see in the presentation, clearly the Native Indians were sold as slaves. Many went to Spain. Many went to Portugal, Lisbon. We didn't go over today, but many went to Antwerp, Amsterdam. Okay. We brought up Morocco, which is in North Africa, Tangiers. Okay. They went all over the place. The Caribbean, the Circum-Caribbean. They were sold by ships and made to be human cargo. Providence Island. We brought all that out today. With that, I conclude. I pray that you guys gain understanding from this. Understand who your brothers are. Understand who your family are. Understand your pedigree and understand your heritage. Like Carmen said, don't disrespect your heritage, man. With that, I conclude. And I say shalom.
My name is Pargosugi. A big ship came into the bay and men in a big boat came ashore. We had never seen such a big ship before. We thought they wanted coconuts and fruit for trade, so we brought them these things. They took us to the big ship, saying, "Don't be afraid, you come have a look at ship." But they throw me down bottom of ship with plenty others. I was frightened. I began to cry. My mother and father and relations were left behind. Then they chased boys from other islands, tied them up hand and foot.
One name where me harem time where Mr. Grow up, all fala refer long all get a ship sol se me say all boat long steely man, all boat long steel. And no say me save say all white man we talk about activity or list up sing out say black birding. And only sing out say black birding where one name me talk here you me no save. But also, you misabe talem say one name way been happening hemi Pacific slave trade.
Sugar planters and others
Henry Ross Lewin for years engaged in trade in the South Sea Islands, begs to inform the public of the arrival of the King Oscar. He will be happy to receive orders for the importation of Kanakas. Parties desirous of engaging labourers, please send in their order. Terms, £7 per man.
The first shipment of Pacific Islanders was landed at Red Bank near Brisbane in August 1863. In America, a bloody civil war was being fought over slavery.
Just as in America, African slaves were used to work and establish the cotton plantations in the South, just as in British colonies like Fiji, Indian coolies were brought in, so too in colonial Queensland, we looked to Pacific Island labour to establish the sugar industry. Very few white Australians still understand that the Queensland sugar industry was based effectively upon slave labour.
Marlene Henaway is Joe Leo's younger sister. She's another grandchild of the boy who was plucked off the beach at Pentecost a century ago. Thousands of the descendants of those reluctant pioneers still live in the little North Queensland towns which grew up with the sugar industry. Marlene remembers her grandfather well, the old man she knew as Poppy.
Poppy came from a village in Pentecost, from Pentecost Island. He was only 12 years old at the time, 12, 13-year-old. So you can imagine the traumatic experience that he would have went through. They were brought over here to a northern port, and then they were made to work in the sugar fields.
Okay, have a look for a cross. Can you find me a cross?
When they first came out here, they were given one set of clothing, and that was it. They had to work side by side clearing paddocks so that the big farmers can get their cane into the ground. So they're basically used as machinery as well, not just coming to cut the cane.
Mi blong epi island. Mino save long wane miaro le kisimi golong makai. Mino save Hamas Christmas mi gbenigia tasol mi mantenis. Master, he giving me 1 plus sarep na mi to. Go katim sugar long hap. He get 1 plamani save was long mi pla nem blong em overseer. Sample time this pla overseer get big pla cross long olgata boy. And me fight him now, whip him olgata. Tommy Lamon Makai.
The Pacific Islanders weren't technically slaves. They were paid for their labor. But at about 1/5 the rate the planters would have had to pay white workers. If that is, in a colony where labor was desperately short, they could have found any Europeans willing to sweat it out on the cane fields.
In the 19th century, Europeans were fairly firmly convinced that they weren't capable of labouring hard in the tropics. They thought they would die, as one source said, from premature rack and decay, so that they were firmly convinced that they needed a coloured labour force. And as those plantations developed, Queensland prospered. Queensland could not have developed as quickly as it did in the 19th century without the use of cheap Melanesian labour. There was no other way that it could have been done.
Noah Sabo is a second-generation Australian South Sea Islander. Now 74, he can remember the stories about life on the early plantations told to him by his grandfather, one of the very first islanders transported to Queensland back in 1863.
This is the old Lindaroo plantation, and this is where the Kanakas worked, and when they came here, and this old Lindaroo, they say it had a good few people working here in its heyday, you know. They had to do their work properly, you know. You had to go out and chip cane or cut cane or thrash cane. You had to do it properly. If you didn't do it properly, well, the overseer, he always had a big boot on, and he would, of course, he used to ride a horse too, and it didn't take him many minutes to get off the horse and give them a good taste of his boot, so that all the work was done properly. They couldn't slum up their work, but it was hard on the plantations.
Phyllis Corowa lives comfortably enough today. She is the oldest of 10 children. Their father, Moses Anaris, was kidnapped in the 1890s from Tanna, another tiny island in Vanuatu. Phyllis's maternal grandmother was brought to Bundaberg as a young girl, but whether she was enticed to come or was simply grabbed by force, family tradition no longer tells.
They did bring women out, but not a lot. My mother's mother was brought out from Ober Island, and I think my grandmother was very young. I have seen photos of her chipping cane, like the cane is already grown. Chipping cane with men, and the overseer standing in the rows watching them, see that they had to, that they were doing the work right. My grandmother never liked to talk about it. Now that I'm able to piece all these things together, I feel that she was missing her family life and the island that she had left.
Me come from Oba Island. Nemblomi hem mati telavus. When me come to this country, Mrs. and Master calling me Elizabeth Oba. Me house girl and me clean him house belong Mrs. and Master. Me play with them pikinini belong Master and me sing him island songs from my home. Sometime when I finish housework, Mrs. say, "You now go clear him bush. You now go clear him ground. For Master, me dig him tree and plant him plenty sugar cane."
However hard the life in the cane fields, there was little the islanders could do about it. In the rest of Australia, white workers were organising. Trades unions were being formed. The working class was becoming one of the wealthiest in the world. But on the sugar plantations, Melanesian labourers were forbidden by law to strike for better wages or conditions, or to desert their employment. The penalty for absconding was 3 months' imprisonment. Right from the start, the so-called Queensland labour system was a subject of fierce controversy in Australia.
Kidnapping, slave trade and slavery are ugly words to use.
We have no hesitation in denouncing the trade in human beings.
Do we want a sugar industry in this country, or do we not?
Are we to accept slavery in Queensland when our brothers in America have shed their blood to end
If the
it?
government wants regulation, let them pay for it. One thing's certain, without the nigger, we wouldn't have an industry at all. Mackay Mercury.
there was considerable pressure for total abolition of the Pacific Islander trade that especially came from Melbourne and from Sydney. So you have a situation rather like how the American North denounced the slave-owning South. So here in Australia you have the Australian South denouncing rather contemptuously the slave-owning north of Australia and especially of Queensland.
An act to regulate and control the introduction and treatment of Pacific labourers, March 4, 1868.
Eventually, a reluctant Queensland Parliament was forced by public pressure to make some attempt to control the labour trade. Although dominated by pastoralists and plantation owners, it passed an act in 1868 which required employers to provide Melanesian labourers with food and clothing and a wage of £6 per year. The maximum length of a labour contract was 3 years, and the employer was responsible for paying the islanders' fare home. But even in far-off London, the trade had become notorious. Slavery had been abolished throughout the British Empire back in 1833. To many in Britain, the Queensland system of indentured labour was just slavery by another name. The most scandalous stories to reach British ears came not from the plantations in Queensland, but from the islands. In 1872, the British Parliament passed the Kidnapping Act to try to stop the forcible abduction of islanders by unscrupulous traders. Kidnapping was not entirely stamped out, but after that most traders relied more on persuasion and less on brute force. Exactly what the islanders were told about Australia, it's impossible to know, but thousands were induced to sign on.
Alright, what's up everyone? So, in this video, I want to talk about the slave trade and everything because I feel like there's a lot of confusion when it comes to what really happened during the slave trade, and there seems to be like a lot of misunderstanding. So pretty much what happened during the slave trade was that millions of indigenous people were enslaved, and now in today's times these people are being classified as African slaves when they were not African slaves. So you have this slave poster right here. This slave poster right here, you have 250 Indians being sold as slaves, or indigenous people. Now they say these are Negroes, and that's what they were, but they were also indigenous to America, and I'm about to prove that right now. So let's go to the British Museum and let's look at this tobacco paper print advertisement. It says the black boy, a Native American. Now pay attention to what he's wearing, and also pay attention to his stance, his pose. Let's look at that. Alright, let's make the comparison. You see what he's wearing and everything. Let's look at the slave poster. Look at the pose. Look at what they're wearing. Let's go back. Y'all see that, right? So those are Indian slaves, not African slaves. It says tobacco paper advertisement, a pair of American Indians, and the view of black children working in tobacco plantation. And mind you, this is all going on in the 18th century, alright? This slave poster is from the 18th century. Most of this happened, you know, since they discovered America, all the way up until like the end of slavery. They were still enslaving indigenous people, and also bringing Africans as well. I'm not denying that. You know, you're gonna have some people that might deny that, but I'm not denying that. Not on this channel. They did bring African slaves, but I want to point out the Indian slavery. You know, the stuff that was left out. All right. So I'm gonna go back to this article which talks about the colonial enslavement of Native Americans. It said included those who surrendered to. So like I've shown y'all this before. So this professor at Brown University, he talks about Native American slavery or Indian slavery, and he says between 1492 and 1880, between 2 and 5.5 million Native Americans were enslaved in the Americas, in addition to 12.5 million African slaves. Now, this is where I disagree. In addition to 12.5 million African slaves, in my opinion, or because I've been researching this, so I'm confident enough to say that majority of the slaves were actually Native Americans or indigenous people, Indians, American Aborigines, and this number should be lower than the millions of Indian slaves. Because think about it, you know, they say they didn't enslave the people, but this professor here is saying that they enslaved Native Americans, and with all the evidence that I've been showing y'all, it's more clear that there were more indigenous people that were enslaved than Africans in the Americas, and I have the evidence to support that. So what I really want to focus on in this article is when they talk about how, you know, after King Philip's War, the natives were enslaved in large numbers. All right, from 1675. Let me see. Hold on, let me pause this. All right, I'm back. My bad. So from 1675 to 1676, that was, or pretty much around that time period, you had King Philip's War, and after the war, they sent, pretty much they shipped many of the indigenous people as slaves to Barbados, Bermuda, Jamaica, Azores, which is pretty much the islands in the Atlantic, right here, you know, between Africa and Europe and the Americas. They sent them to many places, but a lot of times they were sending them to the Caribbean, and this goes for like the other indigenous people that they came across here in the North America. Sometimes they kept some of them as slaves, and they had to send other slaves or other indigenous people as slaves to other places, just to get rid of, you know, just to cut the numbers down, so you won't have no large rebellions and revolts and stuff, you know, because they're trying to minimize that as possible. So they would send their slaves to different colonies, you know, make a profit off of that, and also, you know, build up their other colonies. So it's beneficial for them to do that. So I want y'all to pay attention to this. It says they sent them to the West Indies. All right. Now, I was reading this about Virginia. You know, I was learning about where did Virginia slaves come from, and then they talk about in Virginia in 1680. Let's go back to the dates, man. Pay attention to the dates. Look at this dates. All right. Only 4 years after King Philip's War or whatever, what Negroes were brought to Virginia were imported generally from Barbados, where it was very rare to have a Negro ship come to this country directly from Africa. Wow. Now check this out. See how that says Barbados? They were sending people to Barbados, and then they'll bring slaves from Barbados. Now, I was looking at this slave poster, and you know, these supposed to be slaves from Barbados, I believe. Yeah, right here. So, to be sold, good plantation slaves. Look at what they're wearing. So, these slaves are from Barbados. You have these slaves that were from Antigua, which is in the Caribbean. So, yeah, they were sending people to the islands and bring them back, but they wouldn't exactly bring them back to the same colony that they shipped them out from. So, for example, New England, you know, they didn't bring those slaves back that they sent to the Caribbean. Those slaves that went to the Caribbean, you know, some of their descendants, or, you know, the children or something, would have been probably sent to another colony in North America, like South Carolina, for example. or they would have been, you know, stayed in the Caribbean. And we also got to keep in mind that in the West Indies, you also had Negro indigenous people as well. Like right here, this is Haiti or Hispaniola, which is, yeah, pretty much Haiti and Dominican Republic. This one right here, we got Tobago. This one right, nah, never mind. This is something else. Whole different thing right there. Now this one right here is in Jamaica, and look at the people. These are indigenous people of Jamaica. These are Negroes, and these were the people that would get sent to North America, to the mainland. So you had an exchange of islanders that would be sent to the mainland. The indigenous people from the mainland would be sent to the islands, and, you know, crisscross, you know, it was all this. So that's why, like, you gotta think about it. You know, these European settlers, you know, they're establishing their colonies, but the people that live in these colonies in North America, they just assumed that these people were African slaves. You know, they're just Negroes. You know, they're just slaves. They didn't put too much thought to it. It's pretty much what I'm saying. So that's how you see this misunderstanding happen, you know. And they wouldn't know the difference between the African and, you know, I can't tell the difference between Japanese, Chinese, Korean, that, you know, from just the basic, you know, just looking at them, I can't tell the difference. Or when they talk and speak their languages, I wouldn't know the difference unless I spent some time and try to learn. But overall, you know, especially if I looked at these people as slaves or lower than me, it doesn't matter. So you gotta understand this misunderstanding that happened. Now, these are coins from the 18th century, so 1700s, and I believe these are like depiction of people of Haiti. So we're dealing with Haiti again. Yeah, I believe this is Haiti. Yeah, it says it right there. So these are buttons depicting the inhabitants of Haiti. And again, we got our indigenous people. And I'm mainly focusing on this because, you know, we see the headdress and this and all that a lot. Clothing that the indigenous people wore here in America. So that's why I mainly focused on that. We also wore all this other stuff too as well. But I want to stick with the feather headdress and, you know, that whole attire and everything. So pretty much this is what happened. There was a cultural exchange between the Indian slaves and African slaves, and there was some intermixing too. So that went on in the islands, that went on here in America, in North America, in the mainlands of everywhere. They did bring African slaves, and these two people, you know, being Negroes, being slaves, or being subjected to colonial European powers and everything, they grouped together pretty much. So that's what went on. You got people that saying the slave trade didn't happen, but there was some kind of slave trade. There was some kind of where they sent because pretty much these people weren't really slaves. They were just prisoners of wars, or sometimes they were just indentured servants, which is nearly just pretty much slavery, almost, or pretty much the same thing as slavery, pretty much. And like, yeah, man, like the evidence is there. Like, it's too much evidence. Just look, like, you can just look at the poses, the posture, what these Indians are wearing, because these are Indians. Standing Indian, with headdress and dressed in the skirt of tobacco leaves. Standing Indian. These are indigenous people on the slave posters. And then you also have the African slaves. Like, there's proof that African slaves were here, that were being sold and being brought to America. There's proof of that as well. Nobody's denying that. You got these posters where they say they brought some slaves from Africa. Sometimes, you know, these slaves look like they could be from Africa, but they also look like they could be from America. and they were just sent to a European colony on the coast of West Africa. Because again, think about it. They were building up their colonies as well. So they were just using slaves to build up their colonies like they did in Australia. They take people from the islands and they brought them to their colony to build it up, to work on the plantations. So you got to think about stuff like this. They sent indigenous people, Indian slaves, to Africa, to Europe, and to the and all over America. They traded them around. Now the reason why I had that right there, because I thought this kind of looked like the Coco Pelly symbol. I don't know if that's just me, but you see that, like, but when you zoom in, you get that more defined feature. But you know, when you're not zoomed in, I was like, that kind of looked like that one symbol that I've seen before, and it was this right here. I had to look it up, but sorry about going off track. But you know, I'm just trying to share all this info with y'all and try to get it all out. Yeah, man, I think that's pretty much it. Like, this is pretty much what I wanted to share with y'all, try to give y'all an understanding of what really happened, for those of you who's looking to understand like what happened. And that's what pretty much what happened. Like, a similar thing happened over there in Australia. They would take people from the islands and bring them to the mainland. The only difference is that they took people from the mainland and took them to the islands, took people from the islands, took them to the mainland, took them to Africa. You had all this stuff going on. And also, we have oral traditions just like those people up in Pacific Islands. We have oral traditions.
Just for the record, have you ever heard mommy or grandma ever refer to, we have a little Indian in us? Anything like that?
Yes, I've heard of that.
You heard that from whom?
My great-great-grandmother.
First is, if great-grandmother was an Indian, what does that make you? You know what I'm saying? That's what it is. That's what it is.
You motivated me.
No, I'm even going to get deeper with it, right? I guarantee you, either grandma or great-great-grandma had told you had a little Indian in you.
Yeah.
Florida is strategically important to the Spanish. Very important. Because a lot of the New World wealth that's coming out of Central and South America is being shipped around the coast of Florida back to Spain. And so as a military outpost, it's very, very significant to their empire. But Florida is on the northern fringes of this Spanish empire. And it's a weak outpost. And they're more concerned with bringing this mission system to native peoples of the region, trying to convert them, trying to assimilate them, and it has limited success. I'm not going to get into all the details there because we have a short class, but they're particularly active among people like the Appalachian, who we read about. A group of about 10,000 or more heavily fortified towns around modern, Tallahassee, and they're going to have a fairly close, not a perfect relationship, but a fairly close relationship with the Spanish. So while they're formidable, the odds are against them because these slavers who are coming down are bent on getting slaves and they're heavily armed. And so they are going to, if you look on the map here on the right, if you look on the map, you can see that, as early as the late 1650s up into 1711 to the, getting towards the Tuscarora and Yamasee War, you can see how, extensive these raids were, that they even went to the tip of the Florida Keys looking for Indian slaves.
This is the slave population in the United States. Notice in 1800, at almost 1 million slaves in the United States. Now remember, only 193,000 from the beginning of them bringing them here, over 100 years. But remember that from 1800 to 1866, that only 100,000 slaves were brought. But look at the number, 4 million slaves. Where did that number come from? Now, another thing is this, is that we have to realize that 2/3 of those numbers were African males. 1/3 of the cargo was children and females. If we only did, there were 22% children. If we only did the females, only 14% of those people were females. Who's making all the slaves if there's only 26,000? 26,000 females. Because again, when the females were coming over, they had to acclimate to they're riding on a boat for 3 months, which is going to knock your system totally out of whack. Okay, and most of the females, when they came over, they were not able to bear children. How are they going to be making all these slaves that were in the United States? Who were these people who were making all of these babies to provide slaves for the United States? And the United States was the only place where we were making our slaves here. That's why the numbers are much smaller, because we were growing our own slaves right here. But who were the people that they were using? They were utilizing the indigenous people here. They were utilizing the indigenous people here. How else could they come up with these large numbers?
They need to understand, and if they go into the Catholic archives here in America, they will find out that in the 60s and the 50s, what they call black and African American, and African American didn't come along. Back then they were saying Afro, but according to the U.S. Census record, you were listed as a Negro Indian. Black folks don't like to read. Go read the congressional records. I don't get information from authors. I go to the source.
Not that many people were brought here from Africa as slaves on any slave ship. Some of our people were captured here and enslaved here, tricked into servitude and tricked out of their properties through these servitudes, but it was not slavery as you know it today, or you think you know it.
Travel safely.
Stay safely. Ready?
Mr. Northup, I have two gentlemen whose acquaintance you should make, Messrs. Brown and Hamilton.
Sir?
Mr. Northup, these two gentlemen were inquiring about distinguished individuals, and I was just this very moment saying Solomon Northup.
If we could persuade you to accompany us as far as Washington, we could give you $1 for each day's services and $3 for every night plated out performances. In addition, we will provide sufficient pay for your return here to Saratoga.
Welcome to Washington, Solomon.
Solomon, $43 all to you.
That is far more than my wages amount to.
It's been a most profitable week.
Cheers.
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 Another. Oh. Hamilton, we must hurry. We won't. Let him sleep, Hamilton. Hamilton, there's nothing more we can do for him.
Another word I'm going to give you, the word nigger, N-I-G-G-E-R. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, 2003 edition, third entry, nigger. And basically they talk about dark-complexioned people anywhere, but then they go on to say, in U.S. use, actually in early U.S. use, it applied to American Indians, usually derogatory.
There were more people brought from here to Africa, and from here to Europe, and from South America to North America, and from South and North America to the Caribbean islands and so on, and back again, and that kind of thing.
Saint Mary of the Good Winds was the patron saint of navigators and a favorite of Columbus. This altar painting dates from shortly after Columbus died and features what's considered the first and most accurate portrait of the great explorer on the left. It's also thought to be the first painting of Indians done in Europe.
Here's some other books that you might like, but you don't have to take my word for it.
Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As the country marks President's Day today, we turn to an aspect of U.S. history often missed, the complicity of American presidents with slavery. The first person of African descent to enter the White House was most likely a slave. The nation's capital, Washington, D.C., once hosted markets where human beings were sold for profit. Slaves built some of the country's most famous landmarks, including Philadelphia's Independence Hall, Boston's Faneuil Hall, James Madison's Montpelier. Last week, President Obama mentioned the role of slaves in building one specific landmark, Thomas Jefferson's plantation estate in Charlottesville, Virginia. Obama was touring the home of America's third president with French leader François Hollande. This is what Obama had to say about Monticello.
This house also represents the complicated history of the United States. We just visited downstairs where we know that slaves helped to build this magnificent structure and the complex relations that Jefferson, the drafter of the Declaration of Independence, had to slavery. And it's a reminder for both of us that we are going to continue to fight on behalf of the rights of all peoples, something that I know France has always been committed to, and we are committed to as well.
President Obama speaking last week during French President François Hollande's visit to the U.S. We're joined now by Clarence Lusane, who's documented the racial history of Washington, D.C. and the presidency. His most recent article is Missing from President's Day, The People They Enslaved. Clarence Lusane writes, quote, more than 1 in 4 U.S. presidents were involved in human trafficking and slavery. These presidents bought, sold, and bred enslaved people for profit. Of the 12 presidents who were enslavers, more than half kept people in bondage at the White House, he writes. Clarence Lesane is author of The Black History of the White House, a member of the D.C. Commission on African American Affairs, also professor at American University in Washington, D.C. Professor Lesane, welcome to Democracy Now! So talk about this history of slavery and U.S. presidents.
Well, I'm glad that you pointed out that President Obama, when he went to Jefferson's home, pointed out the slave history there. But it's also important to note that the most iconic building in the U.S., the one that represents the country to the world, the White House, also was a place where slavery existed. Not only that, it was built by slaves. And none of that has been publicly acknowledged. There's over 1 million people who visit the White House every year, who go on tours, who come for meetings, and you can go through that building and never have a sense of that important history. And that's critical because I think President's Day should be a period of critical reflection, not some kind of blind celebration, but it should be one where we really try to get a better sense of the country's history. And part of that history, part of what I think resonates even to this day, is that significantly before the Civil War, nearly every U.S. president was a slave owner, which meant that they were compromised on the issue of slavery, and that had repercussions that, redounded through history. So it's really critical, I think, that we have that acknowledgement because we grow up, we go to school, we have history classes, and none of that history is told to us.
So give us a black history of U.S. presidents, as you call it.
Well, in looking at the White House, and I use that as the prism to try to look at this longer history that basically led up to President Obama, one of the things that we find that's missing in that history is the voices of people, particularly African Americans, who were enslaved during that long history. And that was critical because when you think about George Washington, Madison, Monroe, all of the early presidents who wrote the Declaration of Independence, they wrote the Constitution, they wrote the Articles of Confederation, all of these documents, these founding documents that extol the principles of democracy, liberty, equality, they were living a contradiction. And that contradiction is that every single day of their life, every moment in their life, they were surrounded by people who were enslaved. Now, fortunately, because of some of the historic records that have been kept, we now know who some of those people were. George Washington, for example, when he was president and his presidency was in Philadelphia, had at least 9 individuals with him who were enslaved. Only Maria Judge, for example, who was a young woman of about 22 who escaped from George Washington. She escaped. This was in 1796 when she found out that Martha Washington was planning to give her away as a wedding gift, and she made contact with the free black population in Philadelphia, was able to escape. Now, this is remarkable because we're talking about a young woman who basically traveled nowhere by herself, who escapes from the most powerful person on the planet, pretty much, certainly most powerful person in the United States. Her story is important because she outlived Washington. She lived to be, I believe, in her 80s, and lived a life where she learned to read, became active in her community. You had Hercules, who was Washington's cook, who also escaped from Washington. So there are people who were in and around the White House who had stories to tell that are part of that history that we literally were never taught about for all of the years that we took schooling and we took classes in history. And so I thought it was important, and there are others who have written to enter into the historic narrative the stories of these individuals, because they really are critical if you really want to understand the politics of George Washington or the politics of Thomas Jefferson or any of the other presidents who held slaves.
Tell us about Paul Jennings.
Paul Jennings, again, is another fascinating character. He was enslaved to the Madisons, to James and Dolly Madison. He was, in fact, the first individual to actually write about working in the White House, he published a memoir, this was in the late 1860s, that talked about the time when he was in the White House. And he was there in 1814. He was there when the British literally were burning down the city, and was part of the contingent of folks who were attempting to get materials out of the White House and preserve them before the British came. So he really had a fascinating history. He was supposed to be freed when James Madison died, but Dolly Madison basically reneged on the deal. So it took him a few years to buy his freedom, which he eventually did. And then he actually came to help Dolly Madison. She fell on hard times. She wasn't wealthy. She wasn't a wealthy person, and she wasn't part of the social elite of Washington. And so when she fell on hard times and her family and friends abandoned her, Jennings would often bring her food, would bring her money, and basically would look after her. But what was also important about James Jennings is that he also was, Paul Jennings, I'm sorry, is that he was also central to the largest attempt at escaping from slavery that happened in Washington, D.C. This happened in 1848. For a number of reasons, the escape attempt failed, but Jennings was never brought in. He was never seen as being part of it, and it was only literally after his death that it was revealed that he had played a very critical role in that. So my point is that you had these individuals who were enslaved to presidents who really had fascinating kinds of stories and fascinating kinds of lives that we should know about, because they really are also part of the history of the White House and the history of the presidency.
I want to play a clip from the trailer of the film Lincoln, directed by Steven Spielberg, released last year, about President Abraham Lincoln and the fight to end slavery in the United States. In this clip, you first hear Abraham Lincoln, played by Daniel Day-Lewis, followed by the voices of Thaddeus Stevens, the congressmember from Pennsylvania, and Mary Todd Lincoln, the First Lady. Let's go to that clip.
We are stepped out upon the world stage now, with the fate of human dignity in our hands. Blood's been spilled to afford us this moment now, now, now.
Abraham Lincoln has asked us to work with him to accomplish the death of slavery.
No one's ever been loved so much by the people. Don't waste that power.
That was an excerpt of Lincoln. Clarence was saying, talk about Abraham Lincoln and slavery.
The Lincoln administration was a turning point in terms of the history of the relationship between African Americans in the White House. It was during Lincoln's tenure that the first meeting took place between a U.S. president and leaders of the black community. This happened in 1862, I believe. Now, this was critical because up until that point, although African Americans, particularly free African Americans in the North, had been organized and had been raising issues, policy issues, issues around slavery, they simply had no access to the White House or to policymakers. Lincoln, however, opened up some of that space, and part of what I think moved Lincoln from being not just simply anti-slavery, but ultimately to recognizing that you had to eliminate slavery, that abolition was the only path forward, in part came because of his discussions with black leaders, not only church leaders, but people like Frederick Douglass, but also, and this is in the film, discussions with Elizabeth Keckley. In the film, she's the woman who's often seen with Mary Lincoln. She's played by Gloria Rubin in the film. And the film is a little bit disingenuous in that you could think that maybe she was a servant, but in fact she was an independent businesswoman who had become basically best friends with Mary Lincoln. But also she spent a great deal of time at the White House having discussions with Abraham Lincoln about race, about slavery, about the future of the country. And again, her story is important to be told because she, again, was part of a contingent of African Americans who sought to influence the presidency and to address issues that needed to be dealt with. And so the movie Lincoln doesn't quite take you there to show you that side of the people who influenced Lincoln, but it's an important part of understanding what happened in the Civil War and how Lincoln actually got to the point where he said the only way out of this situation is that slavery has to end.
Then that moment, that meeting, August 14th, 1862, Abraham Lincoln does something unprecedented. He meets with a small delegation of black leaders, clergy.
Right, and at that point, Lincoln had already decided to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. There was some debate about which date to issue it on, but he was already moving in a position where he saw the country's future as a future without slavery. And these leaders that he met with were people who mostly were tied to the black church community, but people who also had ties to abolitionists, to people who were active in other kinds of issues around the country. So that really was kind of a turning point. And since that point, there has been a considerable amount of effort on the part of African Americans to negotiate and to meet with and to lobby, not only in Congress, but the president themselves.
Talk about the buildings, these iconic structures that kids, adults go to in Washington, D.C. to honor this country, the White House, the Capitol. Who built it?
This is really important because I think there may be some sense, more generally, that Washington owned slaves and Jefferson owned slaves. But I think there's a general ignorance about the role of people who were enslaved in actually building the nation's capital. In 1790, after the country was founded, the Congress passed legislation to build a capital. Washington, D.C. did not exist. And so there was a decision that land that was ceded from Maryland and from Virginia would become the nation's capital, and it had to be built, and it would take 10 years. This is why Washington spent all of his presidency either in New York or in Pennsylvania. But to build Washington, D.C., you needed labor. And George Washington, who was more or less in charge of the project, initially wanted labor to come from Europe, but it was very, very difficult to get people to come all the way over on these really harsh trips to work in basically a jungle. So they basically relied on enslaved labor, which meant cutting down trees, moving rocks, digging holes, all of the harsh labor that had to be done literally to clear the area. But it also included skilled labor, people who were carpenters and plasterers. We know for a fact that both at the White House and the building that became the White House and the U.S. Capitol, there were at least 5 highly skilled carpenters who worked for years to build those 2 buildings. And again, this needs to be acknowledged because it reflects that ongoing contradiction, what President Obama talked about with President Holland, of this conflict between the principles of equality and democracy and the reality of slavery. Now, in the Capitol a few years ago, there were 2 plaques that were put up to honor or to acknowledge the people who were enslaved that built the Capitol. One is on the House side and one is on the Senate side in the rotunda. And in Philadelphia, at the pavilion where the Liberty Bell exists, the new Liberty Bell Pavilion was actually built over the old house or the land where George Washington lived when he was president. There's also a plaque there that acknowledges the people who were enslaved to Washington during the time of his presidency. What we do not have yet, and it actually may happen, is something in the White House that would have that kind of acknowledgement.
Final comment, Clarence Lusane, about what you think we should understand on this President's Day, and take it all the way. You write about Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah, I think that the most important thing is to understand that there's a long and rich history of African Americans in the White House long before President Obama. And all of that history tells us a great deal, I think, about the current situation we face, where we continue to see racial disparities and racial discrimination pretty much across the board. The story you did earlier about the shootings in Florida, for example, I think in part reflect an unawareness of this history and the degree to which the country still has not acknowledged and reconciled this past. A year ago, I went with students to Rwanda, and we visited a large number of memorials, and it became so clear to me that the degree to which the country acknowledges its past in an honest and straightforward way goes a long way towards healing and reconciliation. Doesn't necessarily end up with all the justice that needs to be happening, but it certainly is a first step. The acknowledgement and recognition of your history becomes really important.
Greetings, and welcome to Indeed's Moments in Indigenous Education, which focuses on historical facts which have been omitted or forgotten. Please join us for today's topic.
Today's topic, Indians and slavery. Most people don't realize that the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade was when the indigenous people of the Caribbean islands were forcibly exported by Christopher Columbus to be used as slaves in Spain. Enslaving the indigenous people was legalized by the Pope, who declared the act to be in accord with the laws of God and man, and justified it on the ground that Indians could otherwise not be reclaimed from idolatry and converted to Christianity. Because of the Pope's approval, many royal decrees were written which allowed the enslaving of the indigenous people of the Americas. For example, in 1504, a royal decree stated that rebel Indians were to be enslaved, with a portion of the slaves to go to the government. Ponce de Leon's decree in 1512 provided that the Indians he found should be distributed as slaves to the members of his expedition. And in 1523, Lucas Vasquez de Ayan's decree allowed him to purchase prisoners of war from the Indians and to employ them on his farms or export them as he saw fit. Indian slavery in the Americas began with Columbus on the islands, continued on to the United States mainland, and continued throughout the colonization of the United States. By the way, most of the exploring expeditions, which captured and kidnapped slaves, were financed by men like Ponce de Leon and Lucas Vasquez de Ayan, who became wealthy utilizing Indian slaves.
You have just finished watching Indeed's Moments in Indigenous History. Please join us next time. Peace.
Customer pilots directed almost 3,000 precision strikes last year. We're super proud of it. It allows you to separate the bad guys from the good. It's a big deal. But we have something much bigger. Your kids probably have one of these, right? Not quite. Hell of a pilot? No. That skill is all AI. It's flying itself. Its processor can react 100 times faster than a human. The stochastic motion is an anti-sniper feature. Just like any mobile device these days, it has cameras and sensors. And just like your phones and social media apps, it does facial recognition. Inside here is 3 grams of shaped explosive. This is how it works. Did you see that? That little bang is enough to penetrate the skull and destroy the contents. They used to say guns don't kill people. People do. Well, people don't. They get emotional, disobey orders, aim high. Let's watch the weapons make the decisions. Now, trust me, these were all bad guys. Now, that is an airstrike of surgical precision. It's one of a range of products. Trained as a team, they can penetrate buildings, cars, trains, evade people, bullets, pretty much any countermeasure. They cannot be stopped. Now, I said this was big. Why? Because we are thinking big. Watch. A $25 million order now buys this. Enough to kill half a city. The bad half. Nuclear is obsolete. Take out your entire enemy, virtually risk-free. Just characterize him, release the swarm, and rest easy. These are available today. We have a distribution network taking orders from military, law enforcement, and specialist clients.
The nation is still recovering from yesterday's incident, which officials are describing as some kind of automated attack, which killed 11 U.S. senators at the Capitol building.
They flew in from everywhere but attacked just one side of the aisle. It was chaos. People were screaming.
You can see high windows, very small, precisely punctured to gain entry to the building.
What did you do for the victim?
I just did what I could for him. Things weren't even interested in me. They're just buzzing.
Government sources admit the intelligence community has no idea who perpetrated the attack, nor whether it was a state, group, or even a single individual.
So if we can't defend ourselves, then we strike back.
We are investing very heavily in classified defense projects.
We make it our deterrent like our nuclear deterrent. We stockpile in the millions, the billions.
At key facilities, the White House, the New York Stock Exchange, Wall Street.
Safe in their homes.
Well, we wish we had boots on the ground in every community in this country, but we don't. So our instructions
Ollie?
and our suggestions are to stay in touch with
Ollie, hi. Hi, Ollie, honey. How's Edinburgh today? How are all your studies going, huh?
Good. Great.
Oh, great. Hey, aren't we doing a video call today?
I'm kind of with people, so.
Oh, well, come on, Oliver, put her on.
Oh no, it's not like that.
No, well, listen, I see some photos here with somebody, and I can see lots of likes, and what's that all about? Oh, wait a minute, here, it's on your
Mom, she's on the spy stuff in the military.
What? What is this video right here? Oh, no, I'm not going to click on that.
It's just this human rights thing about oppression or whatever.
Honey, you're not going into politics, are you? I mean, no protest.
Safe here, just like you said it would be.
Heavy traffic approaching the A720 this morning due to police.
Police are not saying this morning what prompted the alert.
Claim relaxing firearm legislation would be useless against the so-called slaughter bots.
Is to stay away from crowds. When indoors, keep windows covered with shutters.
Protect your family. Stay inside.
Can you hear me? Oliver, can you hear me? Listen to me.
I can hear it. I can hear it.
authorities are still struggling to make sense of an attack on university campuses worldwide, which targeted some students and not others. The search for a motive is apparently turning to social media, and a video shared by the victims exposing corruption at the height.
But it's far from surprising. The weapons took away the expense, danger, and risk of waging war. And now we can't afford to challenge anyone, really. It's not even the smallest fringe group or a crank.
Who could have done this?
Anyone.
Dumb weapons drop where you point them. Smart weapons consume data. When you can find your enemy using data, even by a hashtag, you can target an evil ideology right where it starts.
This short film is more than just speculation. It shows the results of integrating and miniaturizing technologies that we already have. I'm Stuart Russell, a professor of computer science at Berkeley. I've worked in AI for more than 35 years. Its potential to benefit humanity is enormous, even in defense. But allowing machines to choose to kill humans will be devastating to our security and freedom. Thousands of my fellow researchers agree. We have an opportunity to prevent the future you just saw, but the window to act is closing fast.